The light in my kitchen doesn't ask for permission. It arrives softly, warming the white tile floor like an old friend, uninvited, but welcome. I've come to appreciate things that don't knock first. Sunlight, peace, dignity. The kettle hissed just as I stepped back inside, wiping rose petals from my fingertips and closing the screen door with the ease of a ritual. I keep my pruning shears sharp, my roses pruned, and my temper retired. Mostly. I poured the water into my favorite chipped mug, the one that still bears a faint lipstick print from a faculty party 20 years ago. Some might call that neglect. I call it continuity. No one else drinks from it. No one else lives here. And for the first time in my life, that is not a source of shame. It's sanctuary. I sat at the kitchen table. I refinished myself. Maple, not oak, despite what Julian once insisted, and let the coffee breathe. There's something about silence that clarifies memory, like wind brushing dust from an old book. And today, the memory came in clear. It was 5 years ago, in Julian's condo, the one with the sunken living room and a marble island so vast it looked like an airport terminal. I had brought over eggplant lasagna in a glass dish older than his engagement. I wore a cardigan that pilled at the cuffs and shoes that squeaked when I turned too quickly on polished floors. But I stood tall. Julian was scrolling through his phone, cross-legged on a sofa I wasn't allowed to sit on. Livia, his then-girlfriend, now fiancée, handed me a cloth napkin without words, as if my presence needed containing. "I thought you might like something home-cooked," I said. "Just like when you were little." He didn't even glance up. "You? Own a house? You write sonnets for a living." I froze. Not because I was hurt, no, that came later, but because I wasn't sure if he meant it as a joke or a judgment. Turned out it didn't matter. "Mom," he added, finally looking at me with that sideways grin he reserves for waiters and underpaid interns. "You're practically squatting in that apartment. Be real." Livia laughed then, not loudly, just enough. The kind of laugh that's been pre-approved by someone else's indifference. I remember nodding. I remember smoothing my skirt. I remember asking for my Tupperware back and pretending not to notice when they never returned it. That was the moment. Not when he laughed, not when she laughed, but when I laughed too, quietly, as if the sound might deflect the shame, as if playing along might buy me dignity I didn't have the down payment for. I went home to my 2-room apartment above a liquor store, where the heater clicked like it was breaking up with me. I reheated my portion of the lasagna and sat by the window, listening to pipes argue with the walls. That night, I wrote 3 stanzas of a poem I never finished. I titled it, "Mortgage Denied." But here's the thing about humiliation. It's compost. It doesn't smell good at first, but it grows things. I didn't tell anyone when I opened a second bank account, or when I started ghostwriting college admission essays under a pseudonym. I didn't post about it when I took on 4 extra clients, or when I turned down dinners so I could pay off debt with interest instead of resentment. No one asked, and I wasn't volunteering. I saved slowly, invisibly. Every extra dollar folded, logged, and tucked away like I was preparing for war. The mortgage was laughter. I paid it in silence. And then one spring, just before the hydrangeas bloomed, I signed the deed to a 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town. No loan, no cosigner, just me, a check with my name, and a house with history. No one ever expects a woman with tea stains on her blouse to win. But here I am. And now, when the roses bloom, I don't think of what I lost. I think of what I reclaimed. The sonnets didn't buy me a house. The silence did. And Julian, he hasn't seen the guest room yet, but he will. The walls in that apartment were the color of resignation. Not beige, not cream, just tired. I used to joke that the paint shade was called End of Lease. No one laughed, but then again, no one was ever really listening. Unit 3C sat above a liquor store and below a couple who either danced at 2 a.m. or rearranged furniture recreationally. The hallway always smelled like a mixture of bleach and broken promises, and the heater wheezed like it had secrets it was trying to keep. But it was mine. Rented, yes. Temporary, absolutely. But in that season of my life, even borrowed spaces required ownership of spirit. I kept my desk in the corner of the kitchen, next to the outlet that only worked if you angled the plug just right. That desk held more than paper. It held my second wind. I edited college essays for students with last names that belonged on library buildings. Miss Vance, they'd call me in emails, adding a comma before but just to see if I'd catch it. I always did. They wrote about changing the world from their lakefront dorms. I corrected their metaphors between bites of reheated lentils and sips of off-brand tea. If irony paid well, I'd have retired by now. My meals came from a rotation of coupons and clearance aisles. I had a spreadsheet that tracked everything: gas, groceries, utilities, shoe glue. It was color-coded, not for beauty, for control. My notebooks were once filled with verses. Now they held calculations. Rent due, $825. Remaining after invoices, $119. Groceries. If I skip fruit, maybe stretch rice for 4 days. This wasn't martyrdom. This was management. Survival by subtraction. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when Julian's laughter was still warm and not weaponized. A time when his questions were curious, not rhetorical. But that was before his father died. Elias Vance had been a man of few words and reliable rhythms. He worked at the post office for 32 years, never missed a Sunday crossword or an oil change. He died in line at the DMV, heart attack, 2 feet from the counter, a government employee to the very end. Julian was 17, brilliant but brittle. He didn't cry. He calculated. What happens to the pension? Do we still qualify for FAFSA? Will I need to get a job? My grief wasn't loud. It was practical. I didn't wear black for long. I didn't take days off. There was no wake, just a cremation, a credit card statement, and a fridge full of untouched casserole. We each mourned in our own way. Julian withdrew into his bedroom, emerging only to take calls or demand space. He wore disdain like it was fitted, custom-stitched. At school he was charming. At home he became allergic to silence. The absence of his father echoed through him, and instead of filling the space with empathy, he filled it with judgment. I remember once finding a receipt in his jacket pocket, 2 smoothies and a meal at a trendy downtown cafe. When I asked how he paid for it, he shrugged. "Your emergency card." I said nothing, just stared at him. He stared back like I was the inconvenience. That night I made soup out of frozen spinach and old potatoes. He didn't eat it. I began keeping receipts. All of them. Not for taxes, for memory. Proof that I had held the line even when no one else was holding me. My world became digital files and handwritten notes. I had folders labeled groceries, essays, Julian, Elias, me, in that order. Sometimes I'd write my name twice, just to remember I still existed. There were good moments, too. Laughter in between bills, an occasional compliment from a student, a neighbor who left lemons on my doorstep. But they were flickers, not flames. That apartment saw me through a version of motherhood I wouldn't wish on anyone. The kind where love feels like debt collection, and the interest rate climbs every year. But it was in those same years that I learned how to live quietly, precisely, without waste. Some people find God in churches. I found purpose in spreadsheets and soybeans. I found it in saying no to myself, again and again, until yes meant something. I didn't expect gratitude. I expected gravity, and it delivered. I watered a small plant on the windowsill every morning, a stubborn peace lily that refused to die, even when everything around it wilted. I used to think it was a miracle. Now I know better. It was just doing what I was doing, holding on, quietly, deliberately. Hope doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it's printed in grayscale on a flyer taped to the back of a community bulletin board, half covered by a missing cat notice. That's where I found it, next to a tear-off for discounted carpet cleaning and above a flyer for ballroom dancing for seniors, which felt like an elaborate joke aimed directly at my knees. Remote editors needed, $50 per essay, flexible hours, apply online. I took the bottom tab, the one with the URL printed crookedly, held it like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. That was how the second job began. Or the third, depending on how you count underpaid part-time teaching, late-night tutoring, and ghostwriting for spoiled undergrads who thought epiphany was spelled with an F. My evenings became a marathon of grammar checks, admissions essays, and personal statements that were neither personal nor particularly true. Why do you want to attend Stanford? Because my mother's editing income is the only thing keeping this application afloat, darling. I didn't drink wine. I drank caffeine and corrected passive voice at 2 a.m. I charged extra for double spacing and charged even more for dignity, though I never told them that. Every dollar went into what I called my jar of not yet. It wasn't an actual jar. It was a ceramic teapot with a chip on the spout, a wedding gift from Elias's aunt, who always smelled like cinnamon and said things like, "A woman needs her own." I never asked her to clarify what her own meant. I just started saving for it. No new shoes. I re-glued the soles and called it character. No new coat. I learned to layer and avoid wind with strategic walking. Haircuts? Done at home with scissors sharp enough to trim shame. I never announced my hustle. Didn't post a thing. No inspirational quotes, no humble brags. I kept it all under the radar, because nothing invites questions like a woman over 60 trying to change her life. Julian didn't notice, or didn't care. Our conversations had whittled down to holiday obligations and the occasional text reminding me to watch out for online scams. Ironic. The truth is, I didn't even know what I was saving for at first. A safety net, maybe, a just in case. But slowly, the goal formed itself. A home. Something with walls that didn't echo judgment or leak entitlement. I didn't want marble counters. I wanted quiet floors, a patch of earth for tomatoes, a kitchen where I could leave the cupboard open without being corrected. I found the listing on a Wednesday morning while checking email between edits. 2-bedroom bungalow, modest, garden potential, one owner, as is translation, no frills, no charm, no competition, perfect. The bank teller raised her eyebrows when I handed over the check. No mortgage, just paper, signed, unapologetic. I didn't bring anyone to the closing. No friends, no Julian, no fanfare. Just me, a sensible pair of shoes, and a notarized sense of relief. The house was smaller than expected. The paint was chipped. The bathroom tile was pink, violently so. But the keys felt heavy in my hand, heavy like roots. I stood in the center of the empty living room, the air musty with disuse and the possibility of something honest. No furniture, no noise, just light filtering through thin curtains and a floorboard that creaked under my right heel. Already whispering, "You're home." I said nothing, just stared. Then finally, out loud, to no one. They laughed when I said I'd own one. I bought it in silence. No loan, no help, no witnesses. That night, I brewed tea in the new kitchen, using a single mug and a folding chair. I stared at the garden plot, wild, overgrown, defiant, and thought, yes, this is mine. I didn't text Julian. I didn't post a single photo, because some victories are not meant to be shared. They're meant to be kept, like heirlooms, like breath, like a soft morning that belongs only to you. And in that quiet, with the weight of the key still pressing into my palm, I finally let myself believe the seed had taken root. It started with the sound of gravel under tires, a slow, crunching approach that didn't belong to the mailman or the neighbor's teenager with a questionable muffler. I was trimming dead leaves off my basil when I heard the SUV door slam shut. I didn't rush to the front window. I've learned that dignity walks. It doesn't dart. But I knew. Some part of me, the part that used to pack Julian's lunch while reciting sonnets in my head, knew. And there they were. Julian in his usual performance casual, rolled sleeves, fake ease, a smile rehearsed to appear spontaneous. Livia in pastel linen, holding a paper coffee cup like a prop. And in the back seat, I caught the shape of a toddler's booster seat, framed by 2 large suitcases. U-Haul trailer hitched behind them like an afterthought. "Well, would you look at this?" Julian said, as if the house had been waiting just for him. I opened the door without comment. No hug, just a small, polite smile that could be misread as warmth if you weren't fluent in maternal restraint. Surprise, Livia chirped. Surprise. A word that should come with cake, not cargo. We were in the neighborhood, Julian added, stepping onto my porch like it was a stage. Thought we'd stop by. I didn't respond right away. I looked at the trailer, the suitcases, the floral tote bag peeking out from the trunk, the empty stroller folded neatly. Livia followed my gaze, then waved dismissively. Oh, don't worry, we just packed light. Light, I echoed, as if the syllables might explain themselves. They crossed the threshold without invitation. Livia's heels clicked against the hardwood like punctuation. This place, she said, spinning in the entryway. It's perfect. I mean, it's got great bones. Maybe just a coat of paint. Something neutral. Julian opened my fridge, which still stuttered when you held it open too long. He pulled out a yogurt container. You still eat this brand? He asked, grinning like it was a shared joke. Classic mom. I watched them move through the house like it was a listing, like I was the tenant, temporary, replaceable. Livia paused at the hallway and glanced toward the bedrooms. We could convert the smaller one into a nursery, she mused. Eventually. I cleared my throat, not loudly, just enough to make a point without stating it. Julian turned, still smiling. We thought we'd stay for a few weeks, he said, just until escrow clears on our place. There it was, the reveal, wrapped in just and tied with a bow of casual inevitability. Escrow? I asked, voice even. Yeah, it's just been delayed, he said, waving a hand. Paperwork, inspections, the usual dance. You know how it is. I didn't. I'd paid for this house in cash with silence and unflinching arithmetic. No dance involved. Just decades of tight belts and thinner margins. Of course, I said. Livia sat on my reading chair, not near it. On it, legs crossed, her phone already glowing in her lap. We didn't want to stress you with planning, she added. Thought we'd just show up, like old times. Old times indeed. The ones where I paid and they smiled. Julian wandered toward the garden. Still trying your hand at tomatoes? He asked, peeking out the back window. They're thriving, I said, and I meant it. He turned to me, arms open in some mock display of helplessness. We just need a place to land, Mom, that's all. A place to land. Not a person, not a home, just a landing strip, a holding pattern, a favor disguised as inevitability. I nodded slowly. Of course. Because I had learned something since those apartment days. Let people talk long enough, and they'll draw the map straight to their intentions. And Julian? He'd just walked me to the front steps of his, let them unpack, let them make their coffee, and test the couch for firmness. Let them pretend they were welcome. Because I wasn't done watching. Not yet. There's a particular kind of silence that descends when people start treating your home like a catalog. It's not empty exactly. It's crowded with unspoken assumptions, thick as dust, but harder to clean. Julian opened the fridge again. For the third time, as if the contents might change depending on his mood. You don't have oat milk? He asked, peering in like he was solving a puzzle. Livia's sensitive to dairy. She'll survive, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I smiled mildly, the kind of smile that keeps conversations civil and revolutions quiet. He settled for my almond creamer and shut the fridge without thanks. Livia was already wandering the hallway, fingertips trailing lightly along the wall, just enough to signal interest, not affection. She moved like she was inspecting staging, one hand on her hip, the other clutching her phone, her gaze darting into each room with the precision of a lifestyle blogger mid-shoot. I followed slowly, not to supervise, to witness. This room, she said, stepping into my guest room, has amazing light. We'd probably move this chair, open up the space, and the crib could go right here. She pointed to the corner beneath the window where I kept a small bookshelf, filled with titles no one else in my family had ever bothered to read. She didn't look back to see if I agreed. She didn't need to. Julian trailed behind her, arms crossed like a project manager. You know, he said, glancing at the ceiling, with some recessed lighting and fresh paint, this could really shine. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I'd learned long ago that nodding speeds up the reveal. Let people hear their own voices uninterrupted, and eventually they'll confess more than they meant to. We continued. She peeked into my office, what used to be the second bedroom, until I carved out a corner of thought for myself. My desk, my journals, a lamp with soft yellow light that reminded me of Elias's study. Livia squinted. Could always convert this back if we needed to. Closet space is a bit tight, but nothing a contractor couldn't fix. She said we with the confidence of someone who thought proximity equaled permission. They weren't visiting. They were rehearsing ownership. Julian leaned on the doorframe, sipping from a mug he'd pulled from my cabinet without asking. It just makes sense, Mom. The market's insane right now. Why spend money on rent when there's space here? There's space here. Not your home, not your sanctuary, just available square footage. You could stay in the sunroom, he added casually. It'd be cozy. I turned my head to hide the expression that threatened to escape. Cozy. That room had once held all the plants I nursed back from the brink. It had soft rugs, a reading chair, and the only window that let in both morning and evening light. It was the room where I reminded myself who I was, and now, apparently, it was being drafted into service as my holding pen. I didn't correct them, not yet. I let them walk through my home talking in percentages and Pinterest aesthetics. I let them measure counters with their eyes and timelines with their calendars. Julian opened the closet in the hallway and frowned. We'll need to declutter. Declutter, as if my memories were junk mail. Livia was already Googling paint colors. Nothing too cold, maybe something coastal but mature. I resisted the urge to ask if she wanted the house to smell like driftwood and delusion too. I stayed quiet, not out of passivity but out of precision. Some truths don't need to be spoken. They need to be sharpened. Let them sketch their blueprints. Let them assign walls and paint their daydreams across ceilings they didn't pay for. Let them make themselves comfortable, because comfort has a cost. And I had just started calculating. They waited until after lunch to spring it on me. How civilized. We'd shared sandwiches I'd made, on bread I bought, in a kitchen I owned. Julian made a show of clearing the plates, his idea of penance perhaps, and Livia dabbed the corners of her mouth like she was at a luncheon for donors she intended to replace. Then came the folder. It was manila, thick and suspiciously pre-tabbed. Julian placed it on the table with the solemnity of a doctor delivering news he'd Googled first. I know this might feel sudden, he began, but we've been thinking, long-term, Livia finished, her voice sticky sweet, like syrup poured over something already rotting. My eyebrows did not move. Neither did I. Julian opened the folder and fanned out the contents like playing cards. A brochure for a place called Silver Pines, complete with staged photos of seniors laughing near Jell-O, and one particularly tan man tossing a beach ball like he hadn't seen a mortgage in 50 years. There's a medical staff on site, curated meal plans, activities, even weekly art therapy, Julian said, tapping the pamphlet like it was a gift certificate. Livia leaned in, fingers grazing the edge of the brochure like it might start singing. It's honestly beautiful. So much more peaceful than living alone. Peaceful. The word dropped like a velvet brick. Julian slid another paper forward. This one had legal formatting, power of attorney drafts, financial management clauses, real estate evaluations. You wouldn't have to worry about anything, he assured me. We'd handle all the logistics. Handle, as in take, repackage, and redistribute as they see fit. I didn't speak. Livia reached across the table, placing a hand gently over mine. And we were thinking you could stay here, just for a bit, while we get everything sorted. I tilted my head. Here? The sunroom, she clarified. It's small, but it's bright. Cozy. You'd have privacy. And we'd be just down the hall if you needed anything. The sunroom. The same one I turned into a library. The one where I kept volumes of poetry I'd collected over 3 decades. The room that smelled like eucalyptus and old paper. The one that made me feel intact. They wanted to turn it into a soft landing spot. For me. As if I were crashing. I looked at the forms. color-coded tabs, signature lines highlighted in pastel. A spreadsheet was neatly paperclipped to the back, cost comparisons between facilities, estimated estate proceeds, projected timeline. Projected timeline. Like I was a transaction waiting to clear, Julian kept speaking. It's about making sure things are secure before something happens. You've done so much for us, Mom. Let us do this for you. Not to me, for me. A word swap so careful it could have passed through customs unnoticed. They weren't trying to help. They were consolidating, downsizing me into manageable terms. I glanced down at the brochure again. A woman on the cover smiled while holding a knitting needle she clearly had no intention of using. Behind her, a line of white rocking chairs stared out at an artificial pond. Retirement repackaged as reward. Exile, served with lemon water and spa days. Livia refilled my tea without asking. Just think about it, she said. It's not a decision you have to make today. Of course not. They'd already made it. I traced my thumb along the edge of the folder. Smooth, curated, like everything they said. I looked up at Julian. This took some planning, he beamed. We just want what's best. Ah, the anthem of every quiet betrayal. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition. They had drawn their map. What they didn't realize was that I had already started drawing mine, and the lines I was tracing, they led nowhere near Silver Pines. The next morning, I brewed my tea stronger than usual, a blend I reserve for war, funerals, and days when silence begins to hiss like a warning. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Julian had laid out his glossy brochures like a magician offering disappearing tricks. The folder still sat there, closed now, but humming with entitlement. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I'd already memorized the shape of betrayal. Instead, I reached for my phone and typed in a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Nadine Castle. She wasn't in my contacts. She didn't need to be. Some names stay lodged in the folds of memory like stitches that never dissolved. Nadine had once sat at this very table, back when her braids were uneven and she pronounced lawyer like liar. Her mother, Francine, was my best friend until cancer moved in like a tenant and refused to pay rent. I dialed. Nadine Cassell, a clear voice answered. It's Cordelia Vance, I said, your mother's friend. There was a pause, then warmth. I remember your chicken soup, she said, and the way you corrected my grammar without making me cry. Good. I need someone with steel and syntax. I told her everything. Not in panic, not in drama. Just facts lined up like law books. Julian, Livia, the sunroom, the plan. She listened the way lawyers do when they know what's coming. Quietly until it was time to speak. We won't yell, she said, her voice crisp. We'll notarize. That afternoon, she came by in a car that didn't scream power but whispered competence. Navy blazer, leather satchel, no small talk. I let her in. She looked around my house, not like a guest, but like someone cataloging assets that matter. They've already built their case, she said. Time we built yours. She pulled out a folder, slimmer than Julian's, but heavier with intention. First, she said, we'll schedule a cognitive assessment with someone I trust. Quiet, private, no drama. You'll pass it easily. I'd like that, I said. To be seen clearly. She smiled. Next, audio surveillance. I'll show you how to use small recorders. One in the kitchen, one near the hallway, one in your apron pocket. Apron pocket? They like to strike while you're chopping vegetables. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true. And lastly, she continued, a retroactive trust filing. We protect the deed, the bank accounts, and that little plot of earth where your tomatoes are showing off. I blinked. You do this often? More than I should have to, she said. Families love legacy, especially when it isn't theirs. She laid out papers with surgical grace. I signed without flinching. Let them return, she said. Let them talk. The more they reveal, the deeper they bury themselves. What if they don't come back? They will. Greed doesn't do ghosting. I made her tea. She took it with lemon. just like her mother used to. We sat quietly for a moment, not as lawyer and client, but as two women who understood that preparation was power. Before she left, she turned back and looked at me, not with pity, but with precision. "You've already done the hard part, Cordelia. You survived them. Now it was time to outwit them." And so I waited, camera in the hallway, recorder in the bookshelf, memory like a ledger. The next move was theirs. But the game? That was mine now. It was a Sunday, of course it was. The day reserved for forgiveness, politeness, and ambushes wrapped in pastry boxes. I heard the tires before I saw the SUV, that same too clean, too confident hum rolling up my driveway like it belonged there. The wind chimes tinkled once, then fell still. Even they knew what was coming. I was already wearing my apron. Garden clippings still clung to the hem. The tiny voice recorder Nadine had taught me to use was nestled quietly in the pocket. Button pressed. Light blinking. I didn't adjust it. I didn't need to. The front door rattled with polite insistence. I opened it. Julian stood there in a blue sweater, one of those "trust me, I'm a family man" knits that look better in courtrooms than kitchens. Livia beside him, her hair pulled back into a purposeful ponytail, carrying a white paper box tied with twine. And behind them, their daughter. Little Eloise, no more than 6, holding a piece of construction paper so earnestly it almost cracked my resolve. "Hi, Grandma," she beamed. "I made you a picture of your new room." I took it slowly, as if it might detonate. Crayons in bright pinks and greens outlined a sunroom, complete with a tiny bed, a smiling stick figure, and the words, "My grandma's new house." I smiled, software controlled. Then I folded the drawing and placed it beside the tea kettle. Livia stepped forward. We brought almond croissants, like old times. Old times, when I paid, when I cooked, when being needed was a full-time position with no retirement plan. "Lovely," I said. "I've got the kettle on." We settled at the kitchen table, just like last time. They on one side, me on the other, like opposing counsel in casual wear. Julian didn't waste time. "We've been doing more research," he said, "and we've found an updated care package that might suit you even better." Livia nodded, reaching for her phone. "It even has a memory garden and weekly poetry readings. We thought of you." I tilted my head. How considerate. He pulled out the folder again, fatter now. More tabs, more presumptions. Eloise nibbled on a croissant, oblivious, humming under her breath. I wondered how long it would take before someone coached her to say, "It's for Grandma's own good." Julian set a new page in front of me, signature line marked in yellow, his pen already uncapped. "You won't even have to pack," he smiled. "We'd handle everything, furniture, movers, all of it. You could settle in next week and we'd get things ready here." Here, as in, without me. Livia chimed in. Her voice dipped in that performative empathy she wore like designer perfume. Expensive, cloying, and completely unnecessary. "And the sunroom, it really is perfect for you, just until the transfer is official." I sipped my tea. Let the recorder catch every syllable. Let them build their gallows with a smile. Julian leaned back, satisfied. "She won't even notice once she's moved." That's when it happened. Not a dramatic moment. No slammed cups or rising music. Just me, watching, breathing. Notice, I thought. I noticed everything. The phone in my apron buzzed silently. A text from Nadine. "You good?" I tapped the pocket gently. "Yes, very." Livia reached for her bag. "We can finalize everything this week, and Eloise already made her first welcome card." I smiled. She's quite the artist. Julian pushed the pen toward me again. "All it takes is a signature, Mom." I looked down at the form. I let it sit there, let the silence press in. And then I stood. "I'll get more tea." Because some storms don't start with thunder. They start with sugar and crayons and croissants. But they still end in lightning. Let them think I was being softened. Let them mistake silence for consent. Because the real document was already recording. Julian was mid-sentence about streamlining responsibilities when I set the spoon down with quiet finality. Not slammed, Not dropped, just placed, precisely. He didn't notice. Livia did. Her eyes flicked from the spoon to my face, calculating. "I've been thinking too," I said, my voice even, warm enough to lull, sharp enough to cut. They both paused, just for a breath. I stood, walked to the drawer near the fridge, the one I kept for warranties, legal documents, and receipts the world hoped I wouldn't keep. I pulled out a slim navy folder. No tabs, no highlighter marks, just gravity. Julian tilted his head, smile faltering. "What's that?" "Clarity," I said. "Would you like to see it?" I opened the folder and slid the first sheet across the table. Medical clearance, signed, stamped, dated, cognitive capacity, fully intact, no signs of impairment. In fact, above average recall. Julian's eyes scanned the page. I watched the exact moment his throat locked. "I had an evaluation done," I said, quietly, just in case anyone thought my forgetfulness was a matter of convenience. Livia shifted, her fingers clenched beneath the table, just enough to wrinkle the brochure she'd laid out earlier like a party favor. I placed the second document before them, this one on formal letterhead with Nadine's name printed in embossed serif. A cease and desist warning. A record of Julian's legal inquiry into obtaining guardianship, a warning about financial manipulation, a notification of intent to pursue civil litigation should attempts continue. Livia's face drained. Julian opened his mouth, closed it. And then, for the finale, I reached into my apron pocket. "You remember the croissants?" I asked gently. "They were lovely, but I preferred what came with them." I tapped my phone. From its tiny speaker, Julian's voice played back, crisp and unmistakable. "She won't even notice once she's moved." Then Livia's, syrupy and smug. "We were thinking the sunroom at first." Something easy to adjust to. Julian lunged for the phone. I pulled it back with the calm of a woman who's filed more taxes than he's read books. "Don't," I said softly. "It's backed up in 3 places. One of them's Nadine's office, another's the cloud, and the third?" I smiled. "Let's keep that one a surprise." He froze, arm mid-reach, sat back, suddenly very still. Livia stood abruptly. The chair scraped loudly, proof that something at least was leaving. "This is insane," she whispered. "You ambushed us." I met her eyes, still calm, still seated. "You made coffee in my kitchen. I brewed evidence." For a few beats, the only sound was the slow tick of the clock and the fading echo of Julian's own voice, caught in the act of unmasking himself. "I thought you were losing it," Julian muttered finally. "You hoped I was," I corrected. He looked like a man trying to solve a problem with tools he hadn't earned. And for once, there was nothing left for him to fix or take. "I'm not going to court," he said. "A statement, not a question." "Then don't." "And you're just going to—" "What? Pretend this didn't happen?" "No," I said, closing the folder. "I'm going to remember exactly how it happened." Livia reached for her bag. "Come on, Julian." He didn't move right away. He just stared at the table, at the spot where the pen had once been, where my signature should have gone. But I hadn't signed anything, except my own defense. As they walked out, Eloise's crayon drawing fluttered off the counter. I didn't pick it up. The front door clicked shut, and in the kitchen, mine again. Silence settled, not as tension, but as relief. Surgical, clean, exactly how justice should feel. Julian was still frozen in place, one hand hovering near the folder like he might reverse the last 5 minutes by sheer will. Livia had stepped back, clutching her handbag like it contained a reasonable excuse. That was the moment she arrived. The front door creaked open, not slammed, not dramatic, just enough to make a statement. The way a judge enters a room where the verdict has already been written. Nadine Castle. Tailored navy blazer. A thin leather folio tucked under one arm. No eye contact with Julian yet. No warm greetings. She stepped into my kitchen like she had a court's permission to be there, which, if necessary, she did. Julian blinked. "What the—" Nadine didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke. Julian Vance, she said, crisp as cut glass. You are being notified of intent to file for elder financial exploitation under Title 12, subsection 6 of the Illinois Protective Services Act. Livia's mouth parted just slightly, enough to suggest a gasp might escape, but not enough to make it convincing. Julian, however, lost every ounce of swagger he'd walked in with. His face collapsed inward, less like someone who'd been caught, more like someone who couldn't believe someone dared to catch him. What is this? He stammered. A legal notice, Nadine replied, though I imagine that wasn't the kind of paperwork you expected to leave with today. She placed the folio on the counter with surgical precision and opened it. Inside, notarized affidavits, a printed transcript of the recording, copies of his inquiries about guardianship, and a timeline that made everything look painfully deliberate. Livia stepped forward, hands raised like she was at a charity gala and not at the edge of litigation. We were concerned, she said quickly. That's all. This has been misunderstood. Nadine turned her gaze slowly. Concern, she repeated, isn't legal cover. She let the words settle, then added, exploitation is still exploitation, even when served with scones. Livia flushed. We brought those as a gesture. And Cordelia recorded what followed, which, if I may, wasn't particularly generous. Julian tried to pivot, but his footing was gone. This is ridiculous. She's turning a family conversation into some kind of legal. It became legal, Nadine interrupted, the moment you initiated a process to strip your mother of decision-making rights without her consent, her awareness, or medical basis. He looked at me then, not like a son, like a man scanning for exits. Mom? He began. No, I said, evenly. You had your turn. You tried to move in with brochures and smiles. I responded with facts. Nadine folded her hands. This isn't about drama, it's about deterrence. If you so much as attempt another legal filing against your mother, or any act to seize or redirect her assets, we will proceed with a full civil complaint. Julian's jaw tightened. You think I'm the only one with money for a lawyer? He snapped. No, I said calmly, but I'm the only one who spent it wisely. Nadine slid a single document forward. You have the option of signing a non-interference agreement today. It waives any claim to her estate, permanently. It also protects you from civil pursuit, assuming you remain in compliance. And if I don't? He asked, bitter. Then your daughter, Nadine said coolly, will one day search your name and find this in public record. Livia whispered something under her breath. Nadine didn't flinch. Take your time, but not too much. We're done playing house. Julian didn't respond. His hands shook as he took the pen. Not from fear, not entirely, but from the realization that the door had closed behind him, and he'd walked through it on his own. He signed. Livia turned without another word. And Nadine? She watched them walk out, then turned to me, expression softening only slightly. Would you like tea now? I asked. She smiled. Only if it comes with silence and a copy of that recording. Oh, I said, sliding open the drawer. I've got backups. Labeled. Chronological, color-coded. Of course you do, she said. And just like that, the kitchen was mine again. No brochures, no false smiles. Just a witness, a record, and the sound of justice cooling politely beside the kettle. There's a specific kind of silence that comes after a storm. Not relief exactly, but recognition. Like the house itself knows something has shifted, and it's grateful to still be standing. The day Julian signed the agreement, the wind outside went still. He didn't slam the door on his way out. That would have required dignity. Nadine filed the paperwork within 24 hours. The agreement barred him from any future claims on my estate, the house, the garden, or so much as the folding chair on the back patio. In exchange, we dropped the civil case, but the public record would remain. He would now be listed, permanently and formally, as someone who attempted to exploit an elder. It wasn't jail, but it was permanent. And poetic. His sentence? 300 hours of community service at a senior center one town over. Livia left him 2 months later, quietly, like someone slipping out of a restaurant before the check arrives. I didn't hear the details. I didn't need to. Some things unravel with a whisper, not a bang. I imagine Julian, in his sweater and forced humility, pushing wheelchairs and nodding at women who reminded him, intentionally or not, of the one he'd tried to erase. He wouldn't say my name out loud, I was sure. But it would ring in the background. Every time a nurse gave him instructions, every time a resident held eye contact too long, every time he folded a blanket and thought he was being noble. I wasn't angry. I was busy. Because in the quiet that followed their exit, I began tending to more than roses. I met with Nadine again. We sat at the table with strong tea and stronger resolve. We rewrote the will. The house, my house, would go not to Julian, not to Eloise, though she'd get a box of hand-picked books, but to a foundation I named myself, the Vance Fund for Safe Living. It would be used exclusively to provide housing support for older women at risk of displacement, women like me, who once counted grocery bills down to the penny and wore resilience like it was part of the uniform. Women who had rooms taken from them. I would give them back. The paperwork was filed. The deed transferred into the trust. Everything, every inch of brick and garden bed, now belonged to something that would outlive me. Legacy, it turns out, doesn't have to be biological. It can be contractual. It can be intentional. And still, I didn't say a word of it to Julian. Why would I? Let him imagine whatever ending soothes his pride. Let him think I mellowed, forgave, moved on. Let him believe whatever quiet story helps him sleep. Because I wasn't quiet to protect him. I was quiet because I no longer needed to explain. 3 weeks later, a small box arrived in the mail. Brown paper, purple crayon lettering across the top, to Grandma. Inside, no note, just a folded sheet of paper, crayon again, a drawing of a house, mine, this time with flowers in the windows and a smiling stick figure holding a watering can. Above it, in uneven, careful handwriting, Grandma's house, for real. I stared at it for a long time, not because it made me cry, because it didn't, because it felt exactly right. I placed the drawing in a wooden frame and set it in the sunroom, the one I'd reclaimed, the one that still smelled like old books and eucalyptus, the one no one would ever assign me to again. I brewed myself tea, no guests, no interruptions, just steam curling in the light and a rosebush blooming outside the window, louder than any apology. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in crayon. The morning was the kind that didn't announce itself. No grand light, no fanfare. Just a slow bloom of warmth across the kitchen floor, quiet and sure, like something that knew it belonged. I stepped out onto the back porch with my pruning shears in one hand and a mug of chamomile in the other. The roses had started to creep past their bounds, as they always do this time of year. Bold, overconfident, and utterly unapologetic. I trimmed them gently. No rush, no need to tame them completely, just enough to let them breathe and bloom with purpose. The garden, unlike people, never lies. It grows or it doesn't. It thrives or it withers, and it only takes what it needs. Some days I talk to it, not in the way people speak to pets or babies, cooing and coaxing. No, I speak to it like an equal, like something that has also known quiet resilience, like something that survived winter. Behind me, inside the house, the kettle clicked off. My monthly meeting would begin soon. I started it modestly, just a few women from church, a neighbor, one or two who'd heard whispers and come to confirm them. Now we were 12. We called it Second Bloom. Not a support group, not a therapy circle, just a place where women who'd been gaslit, guilted, or gently erased could sit in a room and say, "This happened to me," without anyone replying, "Well, he probably meant well." Last month, one of them brought a copy of the same brochure Julian once laid out on my kitchen table. We all passed it around like a cautionary tale, and someone snorted so hard she spilled her tea. It was the best moment of the week. They come to my house now, these women. They sit in my sunroom, my library, and drink tea from mismatched mugs while we swap stories, tips, and the occasional legal contact. One of them asked if I ever thought of moving. I smiled. I already did. Because the truth is, I've moved without changing my address. Moved from obligation to ownership, from silence to strategy, from making space for others to finally carving out one for myself. I wear soft shoes now, the kind that hug your feet without apology. I walk slowly but proudly, like someone who knows the terrain because she built it inch by inch, not because she was led. The roses rustled as I leaned in to clip one final bloom. It was imperfect, slightly torn at the edge, petals curling inward. But it stood tall, refusing collapse. I liked that one best. I took it inside and placed it in a small vase by the window. Let it catch the morning light. Then I sat in my reading chair, the one no one else is allowed to assign me to. No brochures, no folders, no forms marked with X's. Just a house, a garden, a calendar filled with meetings I chose. I took a sip of tea and let the silence return, not as absence, but as affirmation. And then, quietly, I said it out loud. To no one. To the walls, the windows, the light. They laughed when I said I'd own a house. Another sip. Now I own peace. And finally, almost smiling. And I don't rent space in my memory to cowards. The kettle cooled, the garden bloomed, and for the first time in a long time, I did too.